All right. Morning, everybody. My name is Isaac Slavitt. I'm a co-founder and data scientist at Driven Data, which is a small data science and engineering firm that was founded here in Boston out of the Harvard Innovation Lab. I'm a little bit like a fish out of water here, talking about design to a room full of designers. So bear with me. Luckily, Jennifer and Amy both covered a lot of the design aspects, human-centered design. What I want to talk about is some lessons learned from a year-long project where we got to work with a human-centered design firm on a project relaunching a product. So luckily, we just had that awesome talk on co-design and what human-centered design is, and Amy mentioned starting from a place of empathy. The whole sort of big idea behind human-centered design is starting with the end user in mind. And so one of the things that was surprising to me as a quantitative person is in this engagement, the design firm set aside what seemed to us like an extravagant amount of time at the beginning of the project to just talk to people. And we don't like talking to people, we like being in our box. So this was really interesting to see. And this is how they think about their process, where we've heard some other people today talk about this converging and diverging, where we brainstorm a lot of different ideas. In the beginning, we're talking to people, getting their sort of thoughts and opinions on their pain points. Then we try to converge on like a hypothesis for the project, and then diverge again on some different ideas for how we might address that, and finally put that together into a prototype or pilot of some kind. So that was the design process. And the other side, the side that I'm coming from, is data science, which is a field that kind of sits at the intersection of a number of technical disciplines. But really, it can be summed up as trying to use statistics and computer science to help us gain insights into what's going on and make good predictions about the future and ultimately make better decisions. So this is one representation of the data science process. And the first thing that we observe here is that when data scientists make flowcharts, they're a lot uglier than when designers do it. But if you kind of squint, I think it's pretty clear from this that there are a lot of similarities where first we start with trying to gain a real understanding of what the problems are. Start from the business understanding, not from the data. Then we go and see what we actually have. And in the design thinking slide, we were talking about what's feasible. For us, that means what's in the data. If we don't have it, how might we be able to find a proxy for that will work? Then we build statistical models that help us understand what's going on and make predictions that help us design a product that can influence user behavior in some way. So this is that empathy map that Jennifer was actually talking about just a minute ago. Both of us are actually trying to solve the same mystery, which is we have some information about what people say and what they do, but what we really care about is what they're thinking and feeling. That's not observed. And I like to use an analogy where if you think about your favorite police procedural, you have the detectives that go out into the field and they talk to people and they're, kind of like coming up with theories about who may have done it or why they did it. You also have the forensics team that's sort of using technology to piece together a full story of what really happened. So I want to use the case study, this project that we were working with a design firm on. The project was funded by the Gates Foundation. And one of the things the Gates Foundation really believes is that one of the easiest and most effective way to get unbanked people, particularly in rural areas, particularly farmers, into the formal banking system is by mobile money, so bank accounts that they can use on their phone. So before there was Venmo in the United States, a long time before, there was mobile money in East Africa. It used to be that people would sort of trade these mobile minutes. Unlike subscription plans here in the US, people in East Africa would buy 10 minutes of airtime so they could talk on the phone. The phone companies realized that people were trading these minutes around as if it were a kind of currency because pretty much everybody needed these mobile minutes to talk to other people. When they realized that, they started to actually just create a product that would more directly let people save money by bringing cash to the phone companies the phone companies would credit their accounts and they would maintain a central ledger. Well, obviously not everyone in a country can come to the phone company's headquarters, so you need an existing system of people who can take cash and then send money, or take money and give the person cash. Luckily, the phone companies already had a massive network, millions of agents, whose job it was previously to sell airtime, and now they were also cashing people in and out. So why is the Gates Foundation interested in this work? Well, in some countries, like Kenya, mobile money was unbelievably successful to the point where people don't use credit cards, they don't pay with smartphone apps, they use mobile money for almost everything. But in certain countries, like Tanzania, which is a country of 56 million people, for whatever reason, the product just hasn't really achieved a good fit with the user base there. So Gates Foundation really wants to see this succeed because there are a lot of people who are rural, who don't have bank accounts, and who would be good candidates for this. So one of the cool things here was that we started working with the design firm before the project started. We were both starting from square one. So while they prepared to go out to the field and go start doing user interviews and working with the human-centered design part of the process, we got this massive data set from the phone company of basically every transaction that had ever happened. That's a lot of data, it's hundreds of gigabytes, it's difficult to work with. So the design firm realized early on that they'd be leaving insight on the table if they didn't look at this. So they brought us in to help them out early on. So like I said, the designers went out, they went all over the country, they talked to dozens of subscribers, who are the people who are sending money peer-to-peer. They talked to dozens of agents, who are the people cashing in and out. And they started to try to build some hypotheses of why mobile money hadn't really caught on there. Meanwhile, we started working with this really big data set and trying to tame it and kind of understand what was going on. We helped build some interactive tools for them so that they could see what the flows of money through the system were like. And what was interesting for us is we kept coming back to agents. I mean, you can think of them sort of like an ATM where they're not really, they're just moving money back and forth. But we found early on some evidence that there was a correlation between the agents that customers used and how much the customers used the product. The design firm at the same time was coming to that same hypothesis. So this was an example of us in their process converging on the same idea for the project. So our takeaway here was we sort of came to the same idea by totally different means. And that made us feel pretty good that focusing on agents, which was both of our working theories, was a good place to start. It's not necessarily the case that it would have been a red flag had we thought of different interesting things, but at least we would have then had a chance to have a conversation about which one may be more promising to start with. Another thing we saw when we were looking at the data was there wasn't just one kind of agent journey. So there are some agents that were just highly consistent month over month. Some agents that started from nothing and became huge businesses in and of themselves. Some had seasonal trends, some left the system and then came back, and then some would leave and churn and we'd never see them again, which is a big problem. The design team saw this and realized that when they were talking to agents, the agents didn't really know which kind of agent they were because they didn't have the full picture. So they can't say, I'm a mega agent. They just felt like, for them, based on the couple of other agents they knew, they were doing okay. So that was another takeaway. You can't necessarily draw these things out of people. Luckily, there are processes, like some of the techniques in the data science toolbox, for digging these patterns out of big data sets at scale. Another thing we did early on was start to build these statistical models. So we're really interested in how successful agents were, because the more successful they are, the more customers they deal with, the more money is moving through the system, and everybody's doing better. One of the interesting insights was that most of the predictive power from the statistical models we built could be boiled down to just the first 2 weeks of transactions an agent ever did. After that, we learned very little about whether they were going to be more successful. This was kind of surprising to us, but it accorded with some of what the designers were hearing at the same time about the onboarding process. So we converged again on this idea of how we might onboard and incentivize and intervene early on. So the designers definitely had this thought, but the model-driven insights let us focus on a specific period. Is it 6 months, 5 months, 1 month? Well, we figured out that it was a couple weeks, and after that, our chance may have already dissipated. Another cool thing was the framing that actually came from the mobile network operator. So they tended to think about how successful agents were by the number of transactions. Well, I think everybody in here can probably think of a couple reasons why that might not capture everything right away. And indeed, when we looked at that from total value transacted, really you're seeing here that the agents that did the most number of transactions transacted the most value, not a surprise. But we can also look at that by where they are and what sorts of customers they're servicing. And if you just look at the cities, then you're looking at most of the value that's transacted, but you're not capturing the total picture of the project, which is really to get non-city people who don't have a lot of access to financial services. So that transaction volume didn't capture everything. We were able to take the data and use graph theory and network analysis to try to capture some quantitative metric of how much access I'm providing to people by my being an agent. So a simple way to think about this is, if I'm an agent and I have a number of customers, how many other agents those customers go to is a good proxy for how replaceable I am in some way. If I go out of business or I decide not to keep doing this, I'm not depriving people of access to mobile money. Whereas some people, particularly in the rural areas that the foundation was most interested in, if they went out of business, they might actually be depriving the local populace of access. This totally reframed the project, because instead of just looking at how successful agents were and optimizing everything based on that metric, we were able to look at how much access the agents provided, and we had concrete numbers to look at. It's not like this was a massive surprise to the designers. They were clearly thinking about this kind of thing from the beginning, but then we were able to subset the users and figure out how we would go out to the field the next time, who we should talk to try to capture the most information. And then also, we're trying to evaluate our impact in some way so that we can say, when we do X, when we spend X number of dollars, we see such and such lift. Finally, a really quick example. There's a temptation to think of agents as all having a sort of generic cash flow problem, which is true. Like, they have to keep cash on hand, sometimes they run out. But this is just looking at the average cash on hand, the average agent balances in a couple of different areas. And you can see here that in some areas, this is a week, so in some areas, agents have a problem that they're totally out of money at the end of the day and they can't service more customers. And some agents have the problem that they have too much money on hand and they don't want to be carrying a lot of cash. So if we had designed for the average agent, that wouldn't have really captured the nuances of these different agent experiences. So what did we build? What came of this? Well, the design team took some of these data insights and some of the other concepts that they had been building through their field work, and they took these back out to some subsets of agents that we helped them select to be most representative of different groups. One thing they heard over and over is that it's really hard to be a mobile money agent. So one of them said, commissions are like the lottery, you don't know what you're going to get. Commissions are the fraction of the transaction the agents get to keep. And they're small businesses, and like all small businesses, they worry about cash flow. And so for them, it's very difficult to predict whether they're going to have a good week or a bad week. And that, in turn, is how much cash they have to order from these aggregators that come around and give them the money that they keep. We saw this borne out in the data, absolutely. Even the most successful agents had wild swings in their commission earnings from week to week, which was surprising to us, because you'd think that if an agent is doing about the same number of transactions, perhaps everything else is about the same too. Not the case, because the number of transactions varies a lot, and it was really hard for them to predict. But in addition, the value fluctuates a lot. And that gets to the point where, as a person, it's hard for me to think about both number of transactions and value just thinking about last week. So what was interesting for us is that we went back to something that we had already done in the data exploration process, where we were trying to look at trends of how many transactions are going on over the course of a week and then even within hours of a day. And one of the things we thought about for prototyping is, could we take something like this and make a really lo-fi model of it that we could send out to people that don't even have smartphones, and not just tell them how much they earned in commissions last week, which, believe it or not, is pretty hard for them to figure out, and also tell them, here's our best prediction for the next 3 days based on all of these other trends, including other agents around you, weather, and so forth. This turned out to be really popular as a prototype among the agents that we piloted it with. And the mobile network operator was really excited about turning this into a long-term product. So one thing that we also came back to in the data before this was really borne out in the interviews was that it looked like if subscribers kept going back to the same agent, they would transact more and more value over time. And the average transaction size did rise over time if I went back to the same agent. We didn't really know what to make of this. It may just be that you know, if I go back to anybody a bunch of times, I would spend more, but it didn't look like that. And this was actually this is the kind of thing where we weren't sure because we weren't talking to anybody directly, but the designers were able to take this, go out and ask people, and they actually had subscribers say that they trusted the agents a lot. They felt a sense of loyalty to their agent. That person was helping them with financial transactions. Often these people didn't have like bank branches that they went to. This agent was kind of their bank. So they did build up a level of trust, and they bought into the system more the more they worked with a given agent. So to help incentivize both sides, another successful pilot that we ran was called Pomoja, which means together. And that is, if a subscriber goes back to the same agent, every time they go back to the same agent, both the subscriber and the agent has a chance of winning some money directly into their mobile money account. This is really cool from the mobile network operator's perspective because from their point of view, just adding a little bit of money to each subscriber's account is not a big technical lift and something that they can easily quantify how much that costs to incentivize. Finally, I think there's a tendency to look at data science as just looking back at historical data, so we're just trying to figure out what happened before, and design as figuring out what we're going to do in the future. And to some extent, that is true of a lot of pieces of the process. But data science can help design in figuring out, again, if you're going to test with subsets, which subsets of the population should you test with? And then how long before I can feel confident that there's an actual lift, that the product I'm testing is validated? Because ultimately, if we take a pilot and we launch it nationwide, and it doesn't actually do what we thought it would, no one's going to feel great about that. So I think there can also be a tendency to look at these methodologies like diets, where I could choose paleo or I could choose Atkins, and as long as I stick to it, it'll probably be fine. And that's true. I mean, they're powerful toolboxes. They both have a lot of advantages. But I think there is a benefit to using all of the tools in the toolbox. So we don't just complement each other's strengths. I think human-centered design and data science can help us avoid some of our vulnerabilities in our processes. There's been a lot of writing lately about the ways that we can be wrong, even when we're trying to be right, even when highly skilled professionals go out and try to employ a rigorous methodology. And here's a list that I copy and pasted from Wikipedia of cognitive biases, which is funny because it says this is a partial list. But basically, it's easy for us to be horribly wrong. We see patterns in randomness. We put narratives on things that don't really have a story behind them. This is a classic engineer thing to say. It's a big bummer. It's like the glass half empty perspective. But I think that the point is not that one side is wrong about things and the other side is wrong about other things. It's that if you employ both qualitative and quantitative, you're unlikely to make the same mistakes at the same time. So if we want to design a successful product, that depends on having a realistic mental model of what our users are doing and what they think. And that's actually hard to do, and it's hard for us to be correct about things even when we're trying. Then if we want to be more right and less wrong, we should use both of these approaches, human-centered design and data science, to stress test the hypotheses that we come up with. So human-centered design helps data scientists by putting human stories behind data points that are otherwise pretty dry. It helps us investigate and explain patterns, which to us just look like numbers, but when you put a human story on them, then we can start to figure out what an intervention might be. Data science can strengthen human-centered design by figuring out what it is that people are actually doing at scale, as opposed to what they say they're doing, and then helping us discover hidden factors and touch points that might alter outcomes. And like we discussed, figuring out which populations to look at if you're going to go out and do user interviews. You want to represent everyone as clearly as possible. And finally, how do we pilot? Designing experiments that really properly validate. And they both strengthen each other by generating interesting jumping off points for us to really dive into using the other lens. Asterisk, you want to start that earlier on in the process. By the end, if you're just looking for confirmation, it's a dangerous game you're playing. Thank you.